You are listening to PT on Ice, the Older Adult, a collaboration between the Senior Rehab Project and the Institute of Clinical Excellence. This is a rebroadcast of an original episode that can be found at ptonice.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Jerry PT version of PT on Ice. Christina Previtt here, one of the two faculty members for the Modern Management of the Older Adult course. As you know, my partner Dustin did a follow-up to a Reader's Digest article where they were giving you the 14 exercises to never do over the age of 50. The reason why I'm coming on here a couple of minutes after 8:30 is because I just taught a class of 15 individuals over the age of 50, and we were deadlifting, we were doing high intensity intervals, and we were doing a whole bunch of exercises with weights. And so I almost feel like my business model is a direct contrast to that article. And so Dustin and I were laughing that, we advocate for a lot of the things that we created the rebuttal for in that Reader's Digest article. And so we have a really cool, I don't know if you guys have been following this, but we have a follow-up article that we are going to be writing with Dr. Sullivan, who's an ER physician who owns Gray Steel. And it's the 13 myths about exercise after 50. And so we rebut a lot of the claims actually in the first article and say that usually the answer is somewhere in the middle. But as we were kind of talking through this article, there were a lot of really interesting comments and discussions, very, very amicable discussions around exercise prescription with older adults. And one of the questions was around intensity. And so I thought we would deep dive a little bit into intensity today, what we mean by moderate to high intensity with the geriatric population, and how exactly do we measure intensity with an older adult population. And so the first question is, why is this population different? And there's two kind of reasons for that. One is that we are going to have some age-related changes in physiology that are going to make our bodies less resilient to recovery as we get older. So we know that normal aging creates a decline in reserve across multiple organ systems, which means that the amount of redundancy in our physiological systems goes down. And as a consequence of that, our ability to recover slows. And so from an intensity perspective, one of the things that we're looking at in terms of parameters for exercise-based prescription is a person's ability to recover between bouts of exercise so that we're not getting into a overtraining type of stimulus where the fatigue is just accumulating and we're not able to recover from that. And we think about that in athletes who are in a high intensity block. But that also happens with our older adult population when they're going through a rehab stint, especially if we're pushing some of the intensity. So that's one reason why intensity might be slightly different in an older adult population. The second is oftentimes, especially with strength training, we use a 1 repetition maximum as this setting point in order to measure intensity relative to that. What I mean is if we know that a 1 rep max is 100 pounds on the squat, then if we're doing a relative intensity of 8 out of 10, we're probably doing reps at about 80 pounds. And that would be a relative intensity of 80%. So you're working at an 80% intensity of your 1 rep max. And people would say, well, Christina, I'm not going to get my older adults to be doing a 1 rep max squat, and I completely agree. And so we have to figure out different ways to measure intensity in our older adults. So the first thing that I want to mention, and this was kind of brought up in the discussions, is that high intensity probably wouldn't be tolerated in some of the more chronically ill, multi-morbidity patient populations where there's a lot of medical things going on. My response to that query is that high intensity is very relative. So I'm an Olympic lifter by background. So my high intensity is often working at 90+% of my max lifts on both the snatch and the clean and jerk. For some of my clients who are 75 and a body weight squat to 90 degrees is max effort, their high intensity may be me putting a 3-inch lift on the squat, lowering their range of motion and working in that range until they feel confident and comfortable to bring that intensity down by removing some of those blocks or steps that I've placed to heighten the range of motion or reduce the range of motion that we're doing in a squat. And that can be high intensity. So the key point is that intensity is relative. And for an individual who can lift 5 pounds, if you're lifting 3 pounds, you're working at a relatively high intensity. And the way we often think of high intensity interval training like CrossFit, where people are huffing and puffing, they're pushing it, they're getting to that red line, they feel like they could puke at the end of the workout, and that isn't necessarily the case, especially when we're working in a rehabilitation setting. When we're thinking about high intensity, we're thinking about the accumulation of fatigue, because when we're working at higher intensities, the fatigue accumulates faster. It requires a larger amount of rest in between bouts, and it's going to change as a person's status changes. And so if you're seeing a person directly out of hospital, you could actually be working at a moderate to high intensity with that individual, but it could just be, doing transfers on the bed, working on rolling from side to side, trying to get them to be min assist, going from lying to sitting at the edge of the bed. And they could be working at a relatively high intensity. And so sometimes I think we need to kind of consider, the frame of reference at which we're using some of these terms and recognize that you could be working at a moderate to high intensity, and that wouldn't be the same as if you yourself were going into the gym and working at a high intensity. So the second thing is, now how do we measure intensity then? And I made a comment earlier on in the podcast saying that we are not going to be doing a 1 rep max on a individual who's over 80 who just got out of hospital, but we can see in a sub-maximal rep range and see how far they can go. In the CrossFit or the fitness athlete world, this could be considered an AMRAP. And there's actually 1 rep max calculators that you can do to get a pretty good estimation of what a person's potential may be for 1 rep. An example of how I would do this in clinical practice could be that we are going to do a squat test where I'm going to set the height of the squat up to a certain level. If you're in home health, that could just be whatever is available in the home. And I'm going to say, to Doris, try and do as many reps as you can until you've gotten to a point where you feel like either you're getting an increase in pain or you feel like you just can't do anymore. And say that they did a squat with no weight and they did 7. So then you can kind of get an idea about relative intensity. The other thing is that you can see how many reps that they can do with a 3-pound weight. And with a 3-pound weight, they could do 5. Then you say that their 5 rep max is 3 pounds, and you can get an estimator you can just click online, 1 rep max estimators. There's also apps if you're kind of in a clinic setting or in a hospital setting that you can use right by the bedside and say, okay, they did 3 pounds for 5 reps. This is kind of what their estimated 1 rep max is. That's one way for you to measure intensity. It also gives you a nice measure to measure progress over time and have the individual see how much progress that they've been making. The other thing that we tend to use a lot in clinical practice is RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, especially with some of my older clients who aren't used to being on an exercise regime, even in a rehab context. Asking them how hard they thought the exercise was on a scale of 1 to 10 often gives me a pretty good indication of what their levels of fatigue are. I find that some of my older clients don't react the same way as my younger clients. and they may feel like they're at an 8 out of 10, but I'm not seeing the same biomechanical breakdown or heavy breathing pattern that I would see with some of my younger clients. That is completely anecdotal, but it's something that I consider a lot. And also, it's the flip side where I think that I'm pushing my clients. I ask them what they feel like they're doing on a scale of 1 to 10, and they tell me that they're at a 4. And that gives me a good idea, saying, okay, well then we can either increase the rep range a little bit, increase the weights, and I'll even say, all right, we want to try and be working between a 6 and a 10. Is this a 6 and an 8 out of 10? Are we kind of at that range? And that allows me to have a conversation with my client to make sure that we're at the intensity that I'm looking for in terms of the desired therapeutic effect. And my client kind of knows what my expectations are in terms of how hard they're working. This type of sessional RPE, there's a little bit of mixed evidence on how much this truly translates into the max amount of weight that individuals can lift. Some say that there's a lot of skew, but for me in clinical practice, that is okay because the extraneous variables that are coming in, did they sleep? Is there a lot of stress going on in their life? Have they eaten well? Is a family member ill that they're taking care of? Like all of these things that come on into the background when I'm working with some of my older clients are really important variables for me. And so that may be that the accumulation of fatigue from other aspects of their life are leading to a higher perceived rate of exertion. That's okay. It means that today we're just not pushing it as much and they're still feeling like they did something and they're working towards their rehab goals, but we're taking into account life because life happens and we need to make sure we're considering that. And so those are two of the ways that I measure intensity so that we're still getting into that moderate and high intensity range. And it's not that I'm pushing my older clients that they're doing CrossFit WODs by the end. I have some of them that are in their 70s and 80s and they're doing amazing. But it's all about meeting your client where they're at and measuring their intensity relative to them. And so this Reader's Digest article, I think, gave a really great platform, mostly because we strongly disagreed with the article, but it created these amazing conversations for us to go through our glossary of terms and see exactly what we meant by different things. We think high intensity interval training, we think dripping with sweat and heaving over, but that may not necessarily be the case for some of our clients who are over 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. And therefore, sometimes these things, although we need to have this voice, it's a great time to have these conversations and reflect on some of our own biases and some of the things that we truly believe and have conversations with other practitioners around their frame of reference. So we will post the article when the Reader's Digest rebuttal comes out about the 13 myths around exercising with individuals over the age of 50. And we will keep you up to date with any updates. Have a wonderful Wednesday, everyone. If you want to take a look at the ICE platform, we have a bunch of live courses for the older adult course. And if we are coming to your area, we would love to meet you face to face and become internet friends. Bye, guys.
Hit me. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, go to ptonice.com, click on the courses tab, and check out Modern Management of the Older Adult. This is a course that myself and Christina Previtt are going to be teaching. It's 8 weeks, an online format, interactive, and solely focused on helping students change how they practice and how they work with older adults. For more information, just go to ptonice.com. Thanks.